I'm going to use a plastic ice cube container to mix the ink in, but you could also use any 99-cent store little food service cups like the ones I have there as well. So whatever you have at hand will work fine, but I find the plastic ice cube tray really useful for ink wash. The first thing I'm going to want to do is to paint in the farthest left darkest square. And to do that, I'm going to paint directly from the black ink container without any water. I'm using a flat synthetic brush, and don't spend a lot of money on brushes, and use a synthetic brush rather than an animal hair brush, because with ink it is a smoother texture. The fibers are smoother than the animal hair ones, which are a little coarse and are better for things like oil painting and acrylic painting. You'll notice that the ink is going to take a little while to absorb into the surface of the paper, and the paper I'm using here is a multimedia paper, which I'd recommend if you have, just because it's a little bit more absorbent. And these don't need to be perfect. These are really about training your eye to look at the variations of dark to light and learn to recognize the small incremental changes as you're painting with the ink. And I'm going over a couple times just so we want this one to be nice and dark and black. And keep in mind with ink that it tends to have a transparent nature to it, so just learn to work with that. It's almost very similar to watercolor. If you've ever painted with watercolor, it has a very similar feel to it. Once I'm waiting for the farthest black square to dry with the ink, I'm going to mix 3 values that I'm going to paint next to it. And what I'm going to do is take the little eyedropper at the top of the black ink container, and if yours doesn't come with an eyedropper, you can just dip your brush in and drop a couple in of the ink, a couple of drops. I'm using about 6 in that one, and then I'm going to squeeze in and get a little bit more ink, and the next one I'm going to drop in about 3 or 4 actually. And then what I'm going to do is in the third container, I'm going to drop in just a couple, just so that I'll have a range of 3 different intensities of gray. And then I'm going to close up the container, and I'm going to pour just a little bit of water in each of those containers, about the same amount in each tray. So don't put too much, just like 1/8 of an inch basically, less than a thickness of your finger, like very little amount. You don't need very much. And the first thing I want to do is I'd suggest having a little on the side of the paper or on a piece of scratch paper. What we're going to do is test to see what the mixtures we've just made are. And the darkest one I'm going to test first is the one that has about 5 or 6 drops of black ink in a tiny amount of water. And I'm going to test that, and then I'm going to compare that visually to the nice dark black square that I have on the far left. And I'm looking, and it's looking like a pretty good gray. And let it absorb into the paper, and you'll notice here the transparent nature of the ink. So I'm going to go ahead and make that next square to the black. I'm going to make that my dark gray square. And I think I'll probably have to go over it a couple of times in order for it to get a little more intense than it is now. But this is part of the process. Is with ink, remember that it's better to start light and ease into it getting dark, because as you guys probably realize, you can't erase ink. You're pretty much stuck with it once it's down there. So that's the challenge of working with ink. Is it's really beautiful and vibrant in the darks and lights, but it is permanent. So, and now I'm going to take a look. I clean the brush off a little in the water, and I'm going into the medium the medium value tray, where I put I think about 4 drops of ink in to, you know, about 1/8 of an inch of water that I poured in, and I'm testing that, and it looks maybe a little too close to the tone to the other one. So I think what I'll do is, to adjust it, I'm going to pour a tiny bit of water into the tray to adjust it, and then test that and see how that looks. That seems better, and that might work when I compare it to the tray, but I'll add a little bit more water just to make sure. So keep in mind that this part of it is about really looking and training your eye to find subtle differences between the value ranges. And for each range, you want to look for basically about a 10%, 5 to 10% increase in the value for each square. And that looks pretty good, but now when I look at that, I'm noticing that the square to the left doesn't seem dark enough when I compare. So what I'll do is I'll go back over and I'll put a little more ink from that first tray back in there, now that that ink has dried into the paper a little bit. And now you can see that's a nice dark gray that'll work well with the value ranges and the rest of the paper. And that very quickly turns a nice, you know, medium kind of charcoal gray. So now I will take a look, and I'll be ready to switch to the final value, which is right next to the white. And I'm going to clean off the brush, and I will put it into that last tray where I just had 1 or 2 drops of ink, and I'm going to test that and see how that'll work. That seems pretty good. That seems pretty light. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that and let the paper that slowly absorb into the paper. And once you have that range, take a look and see if the others need another layer. And it looks like, I'd say, the one to the left of it might need one more layer to balance the thing out. So I'll go back to that middle tray that I'd mixed, and I'll put a little bit more in there. And of course the last square will just be white of the paper. So basically, I'd like you to experiment with mixing the ink and diluting it to get the right mixture, and train your eye to find those small differences in grays and shifts in the value ranges.